believe I want to share with you all some of the challenges that I've had with grieving losses to completion. When I was a little boy, I remember hearing, maybe not directly from my dad, but I would say that most of the men during our development had an attitude that when a little boy hurt himself and he's maybe crying, falls and hurts himself and he starts crying, first thing that they'll say to him is something like, stop all that crying, you ain't no, little boys don't cry, you ain't no punk type talk. I started developing my sons the same way because I assumed that would give them the necessary toughness to be able to deal with a world that was going to be tough. Throughout my life, I've come to various junctures, various positions and places where I've seen myself run into these walls where emotionally I didn't seem to be well enough equipped to manage how I was feeling and what I would do next. And I think a lot of that was directly tied to the fact that I was not fully grieving my losses to completion. From an early age, I can recall never really being authentically me always. Like I had to perform for even my parents. Even at home, I don't want to make it seem like I didn't feel accepted. But if I'm honest, I always felt like there was something more that I had to display and demonstrate to be fully accepted. And no matter how much I would bring and no matter how well I would perform, it never seemed to be enough. Throughout my life, I think there has been I've carried this burden of wanting to finally get to the place where I could be enough, where my performance would be satisfactory to the individuals, the onlookers, that were observing me. So you move from home, trying to be a people pleaser with pops and your beloved mother, and then you move to the church, hearing phrases like, I was born in sin, shaped in iniquity. To think that you were born a sinner and to think that you've been shaped, conditioned into iniquity. I think it's very easy for one to walk away feeling like they're never enough, like they're never going to be enough without something outside of you, to make you that. Well, after losing my son 12 years ago, it took me probably another year or two to even realize that I hadn't even been effectively grieving his loss. Because most of my life, remember, when I was a child, Scripture says I spake as a child, I thought as a child, and I understood as a child. Well, that's true. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child, and I understood like children think or children understand. But can you imagine how difficult it is for a child who thinks like a child thinks, speaks like a child speaks, understands like a child understands, and to have to subject that to someone or someones that are lacking the tools, what's necessary to provide that child the grace necessary to fully engage and interface with their life in a way that they can make meaning or sense of their experiences. If you don't learn from your lessons, learn from your experiences. If I go through something and I hurt, and my mother or my father comes along and gives me the solution, and now I'm either out of the pain or my pain has been magnified. Oftentimes, the only lesson I've learned is how to look to someone else to aid me or provide me some type of support in this scenario that I'm facing. But I'm not developing. And it wasn't until after the loss of my son that I realized how underdeveloped I was. I didn't know that I needed therapy. I didn't know who to talk to. And when talking to them, I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't know that talking about my son was actually therapeutic. But I also didn't know that how I talked about him was most important. That I talked about him was critical. But how I talked about him was most critical. You know, I talked earlier about pressure versus pipes. And the fact is that when we don't grieve to completion, we don't let that stress out, learn how to let that steam out, that build up that we feel internally, it starts to do things internally. It starts to rob our organs of the vitality that they have, their purpose, their function, the reason that they're there, the way in which they're supposed to be serving us, they're no longer doing this. Now they are just existing, kind of like many of us do. We go through life merely existing, not really fulfilling a purpose of any sort. And then you wake up and you realize, or you ask yourself the question, which is probably most scary, who am I? What am I doing? What is all of this about? Here you are with children, separated, divorced, right? Your kids scattered. You may have multiple, situations. But now you have all of this experience behind you. And every time you reflect on it, it just reminds you of all your past pain. What I've had to realize in my demonstration is that in order to come to a conclusion or to grieve my losses to completion, what that meant for me and what that is meaning for me is that every day I have to be mindful. I have to be present. Every day I strive to be intentional, to give attention to how I feel. What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about that? How does that serve me? Really, the focus is serving me and serving others less. That's really what the grief or the grieving my losses to completion looks like more today, I think. It looks more like me sitting with myself, me taking time for myself, me making time for myself, right? To do the things that self needs, self requires.